Welcome to WCAT. I'm Kiki Latimer, and I'm your host for the Catholic Bookworm. And I'm very happy to have with me today Maria Keffler. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me today.
Maria has written a very interesting book for our times titled Desist, Detrans, and Detox, Getting Your Child Out of the Gender Cult. So we are dealing with a very difficult topic in our culture this morning. So just wanted to let people know that. The book is focused primarily on what's happening with children and teenagers and younger adults. So it's not a program that you necessarily want your kids to watch possibly this morning. So just been forewarned. It's a difficult topic right now. So, thank you, Maria, for writing the book, which I spent the last couple of days going through. How about you start us off with a prayer?
I'd be delighted to. All right, Father in heaven, we thank you so much that you're here with us. We ask you to be present as we talk this morning, that everything that we say would come right from your heart, that we would say what you want said, nothing more, nothing less, and that everyone who needs to hear this will tune in, that will speak to their hearts, that we will convey truth. We thank you that you're sovereign, and we know we can trust you no matter what is happening in our lives. So we dedicate this time together to you in your Son's name. Amen.
Thank you. So, Maria, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself to start off with?
Sure. I live in Arlington, Virginia. My husband and I have 3 kids, and I was and am a teacher. I was out of the schools for a while I was raising my kids, but have been a teacher by training ever since college. And this was not an issue I ever thought I would get involved in, but it was 2018 or 2019. A friend of mine called me. Our kids were in the public schools in Arlington, Virginia. And she called me. She said, Maria, I was looking around the website for some summer school information, and I happened on this transgender students working group meeting. It's happening tonight. I really feel like I should go, but I don't want to go alone. Will you come with me? So we went to this meeting. At that point, I'd been out of the public schools as a teacher for a while, but my kids were there. And I was just shocked at what I heard. This group of 12 or 15 people were sitting around a table talking about what they wanted to see in policy about transgender students. And first of all, I couldn't believe this is even an issue. Historically, it's been such a minority of the population who deals with gender dysphoria, feeling like they're not really the sex that their bodies say they are. Historically, it's been like 0.6, 0.7% of the population. It's been entirely or almost entirely adult men who deal with this issue. So I thought, why are they even talking about this in school? And by the end of the evening, I had discovered to my horror that kids are being introduced to this in the schools, and policy is being put around protecting kids from their parents. That was the takeaway from the evening, that if parents don't agree with transgender ideology, that children can be, born in the wrong body, then kids need to have that hidden from their parents. And I was just shocked. I'd never heard a school saying we need to hide things from parents. And over the ensuing weeks and months, digging into this, kind of going down the rabbit hole of gender ideology, really discovered that it's a cult that has taken hold via public schools, smartphones, and social media. And seeing more and more and more kids getting sucked into this has just been horrifying to me. So that's how I ended up involved in this. My background, as I said, is education. My master's is in educational psychology. And when I started hearing these school administrators talking about kids being trans, I thought, I can think of 15 reasons off the top of my head why escaping from yourself which is what this is about. It's about escaping from who you are, or trying to escape from who you are, might appeal to a child, especially one going through puberty. And they're just not having it. They're not listening to reason. They're not interested in time-tested understanding about child psychology and development. And it's really a nightmare for families who are going through this. So that's where it started for me.
Maybe you could start off for those who are listening today who are not familiar with the topic, exactly what gender dysphoria, what that means in sort of the general population right now. What does that term mean?
Yeah, gender dysphoria is a situation where a person thinks that their born sex is incorrect. So I'm a woman. I was born a woman. The doctor looked at me when I was born and said it's a girl. If I had gender dysphoria, I would feel like my body is wrong, like I'm really supposed to be a man. And so that's what gender dysphoria is. Up until just the last 10, 15 years, therapists understood that if you had gender dysphoria, there was something wrong in your mind. And we needed to help your mind to accept the reality of your sexed body. Maria, I understand that you really think you're a man, but your body says otherwise. Let's help you accept your body. But about 10 or 15 years ago, that flipped. And now doctors and therapists are saying, oh, we can change the body. We can do hormones and surgeries to try to make your body into the opposite sex, which doesn't work. You can't change God's design. Your sex is coded into every cell of your body. But this is what's happening now. Children are being told, oh, if you don't like the sex you are, that means you're actually the opposite or you're something different. And we can give you medicine and surgeries that will make you feel better. And it's just simply not true.
It's very interesting because with the other types of body dysphoria, like let's say anorexia, where a very thin, emaciated young woman thinks she's fat, we would never tell her she's correct,
Right,
that her mind is correct, and allow her to starve herself to death. We
right.
would continue to say, no, there's something wrong in your mind about how you are experiencing your body. But
Yeah,
we've
same
gone in
thing
this
with
other direction.
Yeah, same thing with something like schizophrenia. We don't tell schizophrenics, hey, those voices in your head, yeah, listen to those, do what they say, because we know that the mind can be an error. But this idea of gender ideology, of your gender identity somehow trumping reality, that's something we don't do in any other mental health area. You're right.
The other thing that's always fascinated me with this whole issue is that our inner perceptions of how I feel as a woman are completely incommunicable to anybody else. Internal perception is not something I can communicate. Even how let's say I see the color blue, I have no way of knowing whether you see the color blue the same way I see the color blue. It's an internal perception. And so when I say I feel like a woman, what does that mean? I have no idea how you feel. I have no way really of knowing anyone's internal perception. So if men have a different internal perception than women do, we have no access to that information at all.
Yeah, you're
So
right.
it's really interesting, that my psychology background in metaphysics tells me, what do I mean when I say I feel like a woman? I mean, well, I feel like myself. I can only feel like myself. Again, whether your internal perception is similar or the same as mine, we have no way of communicating that to one another.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true. And that's a good point. It's interesting what you said about perception of color because my husband and I have very different perceptions of the color blue. I will call it blue, he'll call it gray. And we both insist that we're right. And in some way, we are. I see it a certain way, he sees it a different way. But there is an objective color there. But right, I
right.
can't perceive it the way he does, he can't perceive it the way I do.
Right. Right. And for all you know, when you see blue, it's what I see when I see red. There's
Mm,
no way to know. As
mm-hmm.
long as it stays consistent, there's no way to know internal perceptions.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, that's why we have charts for what, like how much pain are you feeling,
Mm,
on a scale of 1 to 10, but your 10 could be radically different than my 10. We have
yeah.
absolutely no, we try to find ways to communicate internal perception.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of gender, there's no way we can know if men feel different on the inside than women do. All we have to go on are behaviors, stereotypes, clothing, activities.
Mm-hmm. Which
But
are all just preferences. And that's something that I find so disturbing about this. We have fought against regressive sex-based stereotypes for 50, 100, 150 years, trying to say, you know what, if a girl likes to play sports, let her play sports. She's just a girl who likes to play sports. If a boy likes to dance ballet, let him dance ballet. He's just a boy who likes to dance. But now we're telling kids, oh, if you're a girl that likes sports, you might actually be a boy. And that's just basing it completely on regressive sex-based stereotypes. It's so disappointing to me to see girls being told you're not really girls unless you like pink and you like to go shopping and you like to dress up in fancy clothes. That has nothing to do with my sex as a girl or a woman.
and to suddenly say, okay, let's step in with hormone blockers,
Mm,
puberty suppressors is really a pretty scary world that we're dealing with right now. I mean, luckily we see Europe starting to put the brakes on this because we've seen the havoc it has wreaked on people's lives when, 3 years later their head kind of gets back together after puberty and they
yeah.
realize like, but sometimes at that point it's too late physically. The damage has been done and the person is often left infertile and messed up pretty badly. Um,
Well, you know, the puberty blockers that you mentioned, Lupron is the one that gets used to supposedly put a pause on children's puberty. Now, we don't know if that's possible, but it does not seem likely that you can restart puberty. But Lupron was originally used to castrate male sex offenders in prison. And it was determined by a judge, I believe it was a federal judge in Michigan, who determined that that was cruel and unusual punishment because it had so many deleterious side effects. So they couldn't give it to male prisoners anymore. Then they started giving Lupron to women who have endometriosis. And there is an ongoing class action lawsuit by those women against the pharmaceutical company because some of them are in wheelchairs. They have migraines. They have demineralized bones. They have a panoply of health complications that didn't arise until after they started taking Lupron. So the pharmaceutical company could no longer give it to adult women. So they needed a new consumer base. So who are they giving it to? Prepubescent children. I cannot believe anyone is greedy and evil enough to say, oh, it's harmful to adult men, it's harmful to adult women, but let's try it on kids.
right? You just can't make this stuff up. When you really start to dig into it, it's shocking. One of the first things that you outline in your book is the parallel between cult behavior and the gender identity movement. Do you want to talk about some of those things?
Yeah, yeah. Really early on, I started seeing there are some parallels to cults here. Um, my best friend's daughter got sucked into it for a while, and watching what happened there. For example, she was out of school for a summer after seventh or eighth grade. And by the end of the summer, she had really calmed down. She wasn't as militant, she wasn't as angry, she wasn't as nasty. And her parents thought, okay, we've crested the hill of the crazy, we're starting to come back to reality. Well, then they sent her back to school, and day one, she's right back in it up to her eyeballs. And I thought, this seems very cultish to me. And I started researching. I knew a little about cults, but not a lot at the time. And cults do 8 things to attract and retain their recruits, and trans hits every single one of them. First thing they do is they find vulnerable people, people who are in a place of weakness or a place of feeling out of sorts and a little bit of need. And so they're hitting these kids quite often right during puberty. None of us enjoyed puberty. You know, adolescence is a hard time. I don't know anybody who looks back on that and goes, whew, breeze, would do it again in a heartbeat. No, that's a really tough time. And so they're telling kids, oh, you're uncomfortable with puberty? You must be going through the wrong puberty. They love bomb kids. The GSA clubs, if no one's familiar with these, find out if there's one at your school. GSA usually stands for Gender Sexuality Allies or Gay Straight Alliance. Sometimes they're called equality clubs. I think every high school in America has one, at least all the public and non-faith-based high schools. And I think a lot of the middle schools have them now too. Those are indoctrination centers for trans. They invite kids to them. Often there's no adult in the room, and they just love bomb these kids. Oh, you're so amazing. Oh, you're absolutely trans, and that makes you so brave and stunning. And they just tell these kids how great it is that they're trans. Every step of the indoctrination process is just parallel with cult behavior. Now, there was one part of cult behavior that for a long time I couldn't figure out. Typically, cults have a charismatic leader who can't be questioned, sort of a godlike figure, like a David Koresh, a Jim Johnson. And for a long time, I couldn't figure out, okay, trans doesn't meet that. There's not one leader over all of this. And I finally figured out who I think it is, and it's yourself. You get to decide who you are. God doesn't get to design you. People don't get to say who you are. Your body doesn't get to say who you are. You are your own God. I get to say if I'm he, she, it, they, zir, and everybody else has to bow to what I say. And I thought that's who the God of this is. It's each individual person's own sense of what they want to be and who they are.
You talk about how at some point there becomes this renunciation of family and friends, this isolation with just the people that, you know, approve of your decision and just sort of affirm your own, this insanity that you've dug yourself into. So, and you mentioned to start with here, you know, keeping parents away from their children and these decisions that are being made. Which we, of course, also saw in the abortion movement of keeping parents from knowing that their daughter was pregnant or about to have an abortion. But now we see, again, this separation of the people who love someone the most
Yeah.
and know them, keeping them out of the picture.
Yeah, and that's another cult tactic. The in-group, out-group dichotomy, the good us people versus the bad them people. That was what terrified me most at that first transgender students policy meeting that I attended. Only predators try to separate children from their parents. There are neglectful parents, there are abusive parents, and occasionally, Child Protective Services has to step in for the safety of the child, but that is such an unusual, it's not the norm. And it used to be people who worked in social work, Child Protective Services, the goal was to keep the family together unless you absolutely couldn't for some reason. You know, if the parents were drug abusers, something, but in any possible way you wanted to keep the family together. Now it's go no contact. Go no contact. I see that everywhere. Anything that you don't like hearing from another person is deemed abuse, and you need to cut that person off and go no contact. And that is very cultic. And it really does. It takes the loyalty away from the family that loves you, where your history is, where your ancestry is. You know, you're no longer a son, a daughter, a grandson, a granddaughter, a cousin, an uncle, an aunt. You're cut off from all those people. And the trans cult is your new family. But they only love you as long as you stay in the cult. And people unfortunately find out when they try to leave that they're vilified there as well when they try to leave.
Right. We see those who, if they do in any way transition, when they try to transition back, that no one is there for them except usually the parents and, family. But trying to transition back to say, oh, I've changed my mind. I was a girl. I tried to trans to a boy, but it was a mistake, and now I want to trans back. There's no doctors there for
Mm-mm.
transing back. There's no medical personnel for transing back. There's no organizations easily, readily available. I mean, you really start to see that the whole thing is based on a political ideology um, that has absolutely no basis in science.
Mm-mm. No, there's nothing underpinning this. There's no test you can do to see if someone's trans. And it is driven politically. It's a multi-tentacled beast. But one thing that really drives it here in the United States is the greed. Um, Doctors are taking in money hand over fist with this, cosmetic surgeons, gender clinics. 20 years ago, there was one gender clinic in the United States. Now there are over 300. It's just proliferating everywhere because it is a moneymaker. I used to cite this market report that I had read, and there were multiple market reports about sex reassignment surgery as an industry and what could be expected from that in terms of growth. And it was called a growth industry. And about 3 years ago, when I looked up these market reports, they said that sex reassignment surgery would be a $1.5 billion industry by 2026. That's not the hormones. That's not, the double mastectomy. That's just genital surgery. But I have since been told that that is no longer the case. It's actually much higher than that now. I just haven't updated my search. But $1.5 billion, that's a big reason why it's being driven.
Yeah, I always say if you want to find the evil, follow the money,
Yeah.
because, with drugs, with prostitution, with sex trafficking, um, and now with this gender ideology, follow the money because somebody's making a lot of money on people's unhappiness.
Yeah. Yeah. The money doesn't lie. You're right.
So I want to mention that your book, again, here, let me put it up here, Desist, Detrans, and Detox, is really a resource book of what to do and how to deal with this issue, because it's one of the first books that's come along to say, you can work against this if your child has been caught up in this ideology. And one of the first things you talk about very concretely are conversations with your child.
Yeah, I want to encourage parents, if you're going through this, there is a way out, there is a way through it. It's not quick. When I talk to parents, everyone wants the silver bullet. What's the thing I do? What's the thing I say? How do I make this stop now? And the parents who I've talked to who've gotten their kids out, it has not been a quick process. It's a long, slow slog. And it's difficult, but you can do it. Parents are getting their kids back. And you want to always affirm a child's feelings. And I know that sounds strange because feelings are not facts, but we don't want to invalidate kids' feelings. So when a child comes to you and says, I just feel like I was born in the wrong body, I don't feel like a girl, or I don't feel like a boy, you can affirm that feeling. You can say, wow, that sounds like a really hard feeling. I'm sorry you're going through that. I've experienced times where I just didn't like myself. I wished I was someone else. And I can agree, that's a hard feeling. but you don't want to affirm wrong beliefs. After validating the feelings, boy, that's a hard way to feel. I get that you're feeling that. After that, you say, but you know what? It's not possible for us to be born in the wrong body. It's not possible to change sex. And your child's probably going to start pushing back on you with that. And that's the place where you've got to arm yourself with a lot of patience, ask for God's peace as you go through this, and be prepared for some tough conversations going forward. But as we said earlier, there's no data supporting this. There's no research supporting this. When you dig in and get to the bottom of the so-called research, it's mostly self-selected surveys where the researcher decided ahead of time what they wanted the outcome to be, and they just tweak the questions and the data to make it look like what they want, but there's no real research there. So the facts are on mom and dad's side. One other thing I want to say about that, be the soft landing place. Think ahead. What is your goal here? Your goal is to get your child back. Your goal is for your child to say, hey, I was wrong about this. I really am a girl. I really am a boy. That's hard to do. Have you ever just dug your heels in on something, you're so sure you're right about it, and then later you found out you're wrong and you had to eat crow? And it is so hard to say, you know what, I was wrong. And with this ideology, the kids that are indoctrinated into it, they're so sure they're absolutely right. And it's really hard to admit I made a huge mistake. So mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, aunts and uncles, while you're pushing back on the faulty reasoning, be really careful not to alienate the child. Don't mock. Oh, this is the stupidest thing I ever heard of. You're just being an idiot. Don't do it that way. Be kind, be gentle, but insist upon the truth, because the kids who are coming out of this, they are so grateful for the people in their lives who didn't lie to them. They'll say, I was so awful to my mom and dad. I was so hateful. I was so mean, but they never gave up on me and they never lied to me. They kept telling me the truth. And they were the soft landing place when the trans community and the medical community and the therapy community abandoned them. They can come back to those people who insisted on the truth but continued to love them through it.
Right. So you really talk about validating their feelings and but without validating their faulty reasoning.
Yeah.
Yeah, which
Yeah,
is it's like walking a tight line, isn't it?
it is. It's super hard. It is because feelings do come and go. They're not what we want to base our reality on, but feelings serve as red flags. You know, when I get hurt about something, I'm feeling a real hurt. But I need to examine that. Is what happened really worth being hurt over? For example, if I'm dating a guy and I see him hug another girl, I'm going to get jealous. I'm going to get jealous and feel like, well, maybe not everybody would. I might be of the jealous sort. But if I saw him hugging another girl, I'd be, hey, what's going on there? Wait a minute. My feeling is telling me I don't like that, what I just saw. But if I find out that's his sister, oh, okay, my reasoning was wrong. I don't have anything to be jealous about. He just loves his sister. That's the difference between your feelings and the facts and your logic. And it's okay to say, oh yeah, I'd be jealous if I thought my boyfriend were hugging another girl too. Oh, but you know what? That's just his sister. You don't need to be jealous about that.
You also talk about setting boundaries, which I thought was really good because you don't want to make everything a battleground. You know, that old choose your battles,
Yeah.
choose them carefully. I remember years ago, Dr. James Dobson from
Mhm.
Focus on the Family talking about, during puberty and, pick your battles, pick them carefully.
Yeah.
Um, so you don't want to say no to everything.
Yeah, it's a tough decision to make, and it's best if the mom and the dad can be on the same page with it. So, talk about it. What are some non-negotiables here? People often ask me about the pronouns. Should I use the preferred pronouns? Should I use the preferred name? In general, I would say no. Don't use the wrong pronouns because you're agreeing with a lie. We know God created us male and female, and if I call my daughter he or they, I am tacitly saying I agree that God made a mistake. Um, One thing I've heard parents who are of faith backgrounds say is, you know what, you're asking me to do something that I don't think God agrees with. And if I have to choose between offending God or offending you, I'm afraid I'm going to have to offend you. Those, I think, are boundaries that we want to set. Now, if you've got a daughter named Sarah who suddenly wants to be called Zach, I wouldn't agree with the Zach name, but you might say, you know what, we're just going to call you Sweetie. We're just going to go with a nickname that we can agree on, because calling her Sarah when she doesn't want to be called Sarah is going to come across as combative. You're intentionally doing what I don't want you to do. But calling her Zach, again, is agreeing. Zach is a boy's name. I'm not going to call you by a boy's name. The nuance and the give and take there can be a little different for different families, but I really would say place your boundaries where you're not going to lie. I'm not going to do something that I think is a lie. I'm not going to intentionally provoke you, but I'm also not going to lie for your sake.
At the same time, you said to back off, certainly on activities, you want to do a quote unquote stereotypical boy or girl activity, like back off. And also you suggested backing off on how they dress,
The
which
dressing,
obviously is easier with girls because girls have been dressing like boys for centuries.
yeah.
But in reverse, the boy who wants to dress like a girl, that's a little tougher on, especially fathers, I think.
Yeah, that is a little harder. I don't I don't have a good hard this is my opinion on that. I've been challenged on this. Like, why is it okay for girls to dress like boys, but it's, not okay for a boy to wear a dress? I don't know, but I do think that's wrong. And I can't come up with a good, solid because it is cultural. There are places in the world, Scotland, men wear kilts. That's very masculine. In some Middle Eastern countries, men wear what looks like a very long shirt that comes down to their knees or ankles. That's essentially a dress. But I think we do have to respect culturally the way norms are. And in our culture, boys don't wear dresses, and it says a very particular thing if they do. Again, this is sort of like Paul says in the Bible, I am saying this not that God gave it to me. I feel that it's not wise to let boys wear dresses because that is a social transition. When you dress as the opposite sex, when you cut your hair in a way that is trying to be deceptive, that is a social transition. That is a treatment protocol. Now, girls can have short hair and wear baseball caps and wear jeans, and nobody thinks anything about it. So it's the element of deception that I take issue with. And when I see a boy wearing a dress, I see someone trying to deceive others. And I guess that's where I put my boundary down. I would not be in favor of trying to deceive people.
You mentioned having no control over anyone but yourself.
Yeah.
So sort of recognizing that you can't force somebody out of the trans position that they've placed themselves in.
Yeah. We don't have control over anybody but ourselves. And as parents, it behooves us to remember that as our children get older, we have less and less control. When they're babies, we have full control. They eat when we want them to, we take them where we want them to go. But as children get older, it's a constant shifting of how much autonomy we let them have. And if you give them too much, they can get in trouble. But if you don't give them enough, they're going to keep pulling and pulling and pulling and eventually break away in ways that may not be healthy. So we need to recognize that especially when kids go out the door and the culture, the school is very affirming of trans ideology. So if your child is in a public school, you probably have a lot less authority than you think you do there. Schools are setting up gender closets where a child can come to school, a boy can come to school dressed as a boy to satisfy his parents and come to school and put on a dress and pretend to be a girl without the parents knowing. That's happening in a lot of places. Teachers are hiding things from parents. So recognize that you may need to pull the child from school to have appropriate boundaries. But that's something you've really got to be aware of. You can't just put your foot down and say you're not doing this because the whole culture is saying, oh, we'll help you do it right behind mom and dad's back.
You go into what you call 11 crucial relationship skills. And I thought maybe you just would mention a few. Again, this book, if you're dealing with this, has like very, very concrete ideas and steps and things to do, which is really excellent. But maybe talk about the one that, really stuck out was, really developing listening skills
Mm,
and really watching your tone, which we
yeah.
all like,
We all struggle with that, right? None
right.
of us are perfect communicators. Even if we think our relationships are great, they can all be better because we're sinful people who make mistakes. But yeah, those listening skills are really hard, especially I think for parents, because
I
we've been,
mean, you're hurt, you're angry, and you're probably also thinking like, what the heck did I do wrong? Like I
oh,
must
yeah,
have done something wrong, or maybe my husband did something wrong, or where did So you're hurt, you're angry, you're frustrated, and you're fed up with this insanity that you're dealing with. So you can really get harsh with your tone, and it's just like stop and get
mhm,
over this and
yeah,
not,
yeah,
like you're saying, it's not a quick fix. Your book makes that very clear. But
yeah. Um, It's always okay in a conversation if you feel yourself getting angry, getting upset, you're rising up, you're gesticulating, you feel your face getting hot. It's always okay to take a break. It's wise to take a break. And if you see the other person, the child or, your spouse or whoever getting upset, you can always take a break and say, you know what? I am not in a great place right now. I want to be able to discuss this calmly and rationally, and I know I'm not there right now. Can we put a pause on this and come back to it when we're both in a better frame of mind? Because you do, remember, always keep your end goal in mind. Your end goal is for your child to accept his or her sexed body as reality. And it's going to take a lot of talks, a lot of logic, a lot of arguments, probably. But that child needs to know you love him or her. You are safe. And what I mean by safe is not that you don't ever challenge or push back. No, you've got to challenge, you've got to push back, but you're going to do it in a tone that is gentle, that is peaceful, and that is patient. And that's so hard to do when you see your child just barreling down a path that you know has no good end. But practice that. I had a great friend when my kids were young. She's still my friend, but when my kids were young, I called her the toddler whisperer. She was a kindergarten and preschool teacher. And one of the things she taught me, when you feel yourself getting angry and the kids' voices are going up and yours is going up, she said, intentionally lower your voice. She said, when you speak softly and whisper, your kids will stop screaming because they want to listen. She's right. It works almost every time. And I'll even tell you, I do it with adults when I'm getting into an escalating and we're both raising our voices and getting hot. If I just take mine down, the other person almost always comes down too. So it takes that intentional, I'm going to calm down. I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to count to 10. And again, if you need to, just say, I need a break. This is so important to me. I want to come back to this conversation. I need a little break first, and nothing wrong with that.
because otherwise, I mean, we know we wind up with screaming matches and slam doors when you're trying to say I love you to somebody, and it winds up with just this disaster time and time again. So it really has to be something we think about ahead of time,
Yeah.
that you plan. And one of the things you mentioned is like when a child comes home, you want to have them, like you mentioned earlier, gentle landing, like to let them come in the door and say something good, say something that you can affirm. Your hair looks nice. I hope you had a night. How was your day? Asking open-ended questions, but not immediately every time you see your child zeroing in on the problem.
Right. And that's something that I think is good advice for all of us all the time in all of our relationships. And it's hard to remember. But when you encounter someone for the first time, whether it's first thing in the morning, first thing at work, first thing after coming home from school or work, try to make those first interactions positive. Hey, I'm glad to see you. If you know that that child or your spouse or your friend had something going on that day, ask about it. How did the history test go? Show interest. And one of the things we hear from kids who have gone through the trans thing and come out is, excuse me, they hated if their parents made every conversation about trans. It's so tempting as a parent because again, you want to get through this. Let's have these conversations. Let's get this done. Let's get through it. But you can't force it. You can't make it go faster. And it's actually wise from what we're learning to try to steer the conversation, the activities, everything away from trans and focus on other things because the child is in a cult. Outside your home, they are bathing, swimming, everything's about that cult. So if you can, get that child interested in, hey, can you help me make dinner? Hey, could we work on this project together? Hey, you want to go skiing this weekend? And try to do other things to pull the interest away from the cult. But focusing on having those positive, good interactions first keeps you from becoming someone the child doesn't want to see. Because every time I see mom, the first thing she does is goes, when are you going to drop this stupid trans thing? Look for something positive or thoughtful to say.
One of the most interesting things I thought was that you said praise what they do, not who they are. And you had two things, you succeed because you work hard. So that's what you do, as opposed to saying to someone you succeed because you're so smart. That
Yeah,
was
this
fascinating to me.
Yeah, this comes out of psychology, out of educational psychology. It's so easy to praise kids. Oh, you're so smart. You're so talented. I've lived overseas and I would often have people tell me, oh, you're so lucky foreign language comes so easily to you. And it just made me want to throttle them because I'm like, I work really hard. I study really hard. And telling me, oh, you just got that because it's easy for you. It belittles the hard work that you do, but it also, for kids, if you say, oh, you succeeded because you're so smart, they are less likely to take risks in the future because if they risk something and they fail, then it's going to mean they're not as smart as they thought they were, or people are not going to think that they're as smart as they are. But when you praise them for how hard they worked, wow, you put so much time in studying for that math test and you got a good grade. What you're cultivating is an internal locus of control. When I was coming through psychology, and I'm sure when you were coming through psychology, we learned kids need to have an internal locus of control, which means they feel that their behaviors drive their life outcomes. If I work hard, I'll succeed. If I save money, I'll have a good, healthy bank account. Today, and especially in the trans cult, I see kids being taught just the opposite. If you are hurt, it's because somebody else said something they shouldn't. If you failed on a test, it's because your teacher didn't teach it well enough. That's giving them an external locus of control where they don't have any power over their lives. And we know people with an external locus of control, they don't succeed well. They don't make good wives, husbands, workers. And so we want to cultivate that sense in kids that what you do is what matters.
That's amazing. It's really
Yeah.
good, and sometimes we sort of know it, but your book clearly points those kind of things out.
It's so much easier just to say, good job, what a smart kid you are, and learning to train yourself, to say, you worked hard, you collaborated with other people, you put the time in. It's harder, but it's absolutely worth it.
When you really start getting in the book to really talking about deprogramming a kid from, what the school has told them is okay, what social media, and we certainly are seeing this escalate with peer pressure because, right now it's just cool to be trans. I mean, we saw it with it's cool to be gay. It's just cool to be trans. So a lot of times they're just wanting to be cool and fit in somewhere, especially a kid who doesn't fit in. And I want to go back to also with the trans thing. We often see kids with other issues, right?
Oh, a
Trans
lot.
doesn't usually just pop out of nowhere.
No, again, cults look for vulnerable people. They're looking, and I have heard of educators saying in training, we were told, go find the kid who's sitting alone in the cafeteria. Go find the kid who's alone at his locker. Talk to them about the GSA, the Gender and Sexuality Allies Club. That's grooming behavior, by the way, where they're actually trying to create kids who identify as these things. But yeah, these are the vulnerable kids. Some estimates are putting autism at like 65 to 70% of kids who identify as trans are either identified as autistic or they share some autistic traits. And there are a number of reasons why autistic kids are particularly vulnerable to this. But one of the big ones is they don't feel they fit in socially. Kids who are on the spectrum, their brains work differently. They don't fit in easily with other kids. Trans comes along and says, "Oh, you feel that way because you're actually the other sex." And it sounds like a good explanation, but everybody who gets sucked into a cult is looking for an answer. They're looking for a fix. Kids who get sucked into trans, they may have had prior trauma, whether that's a sexual trauma or a divorce or a rejection somehow. They're looking for an answer. Why do I feel so bad? And we all feel bad at some time, don't we? We all have those times where we just feel like, what's wrong with me? And trans comes along and says, oh, what's wrong with you is that you're the wrong gender, you're the wrong sex. And they get sucked in for that. But as you said, so many kids are finding that this gives them a lot of social power. It makes them popular. It lets them get teachers fired. When you were 12 or 13 or 14, wouldn't you love to have been able to have a golden ticket that nobody can criticize you? Nobody can tell you you're wrong about anything. And if anybody says anything you don't like, you can get them in trouble with the administration. You can get the teachers fired. That's a heady lot of power there. And that's what's happening.
You also mentioned for parents trying to figure out what happened, where, because children are in pain. It's obvious this is coming out of a painful place, trying to figure out, what caused that in the first place. That's got to be difficult, I was thinking, in a family where you know full well what caused it and you're part of the problem. So some of that was my one big question, what if you realize you're part of the problem?
Yeah, if you realize, and none of us are perfect parents, we've all made mistakes, and it is right for us to admit that to our kids. When we've messed up, we need to say, honey, I need to apologize. I have a temper, and I have exploded and said stupid things, and I've had to come back to my kids and go, that thing I said earlier, I'm so sorry. That was wrong of me. If you're finding that it's a pattern with you and you're not able to break out of it, get help. Now, it's harder and harder to find therapists who do not push the trans ideology agenda, but they are out there. start with your pastor, your priest, start with someone in the church, try to find a good, healthy therapist. And I do mention in the book some of the questions you can ask to vet therapists, but get help. We want to strengthen our families. We want to become more godly people. We want to become better parents. And that's just good advice for any of us, no matter what our kids are going through, is we want to be people who our kids can count on and depend on. And if we have brokenness, if we have damage, we want to fix those things.
I would add to that, if you find a therapist and you realize they're not a good therapist, don't be afraid to change therapists, to get rid of a bad therapist and find a better one or a good one.
Absolutely.
Because
They're
while
not your
those may
buddies. They're not your friends. You're hiring them to do a job. So if they're not doing the job, fire them and find another one.
Right, right. My husband and I at one point went for marriage counseling, and after about 3 months, realized our marriage counselor was in worse shape than we were. That she was a crazy person, and who clearly it was kind of nice for me for a while. She thought I was all right and he was all wrong. But after a while, I thought she's not really helping matters; she's making matters worse.
Uh,
And I think her goal was really to get us divorced, so we sent her packing.
It's
So I
funny you say that. We had a similar experience. Our marriage was a little rocky. We went to a therapist and he was talking to me about kicking my husband out, that was what was going to happen for him to wake up. And then we talked to our pastor and found out that this is not a therapist they recommend. They know about him and got us better help. But yeah, you can definitely find yourself in a room with a therapist who does not know what they're doing or who does know what they're doing and is doing the wrong thing.
right, yeah. So be aware of that. Be discerning and prudent when you're trying to, zero in on a good therapist, and don't be afraid to walk away from a bad one.
Yeah, good advice.
There's you also talk about sort of figuring out in your family and friends and the community who's on your side and who isn't,
Hmm.
so that you do create a support system for yourself.
Yeah, used to be when we sent our kids out the door, we could be reasonably sure that the people in the culture and at school were teaching them the same things that we were, but that's no longer the case. And so you really need to identify who is feeding my child the trans juice. Where is this coming from? My nonprofit is Advocates Protecting Children, and we support families who are going through this. And we tell people public school, smartphones, and social media are the three main vectors. But in just your relationships, is Aunt Cindy, feeding your child the trans juice every time your child's at her house? If so, and your child is young enough to control that, you want to make sure she's not spending time alone with Aunt Cindy. Um, is the judo instructor supporting it? If so, you need to find a new judo instructor. As much as possible, you want to surround your kid with people who you can trust, and as much as possible, keep the untrustworthy ones on the outside.
I think a lot of times we think, well, this all sort of happened innocently and accidentally in the schools, and that these are very well-meaning people. But about 30 years ago, our local library here in Rhode Island, one of the bigger libraries in Westerly, Rhode Island, had a Women's Health Day. And I attended it, just sort of the fun of it, get away from the kids for a day kind of thing. And I was in a sort of a breakout group section at the end of the day. And mind you, this was 30 years ago. And in this group session of about 15, 20 women in a circle, this one woman said, um, I work with Planned Parenthood. And what we do is we go into a school and we get to know the parents, and we set up a hygiene program in the elementary schools. We set up a hygiene program. And she said, we do that for like 2 years. And then after that, everybody loves us and trusts us. And then we can go in with our sex programs and do
Mhm.
anything we want. And she just said this, like it was okay. And it was fascinating to me because everyone just kind of smiled and nodded, and I was just absolutely aghast. But This was 30 years ago, mind you. This was a planned initiative. This was a planned strategy. You go in with a hygiene program, get everyone to trust you. She said it's very sweet and innocuous. And then you go in and you can do what, after that, she said you move into the middle school and the high schools and you can do whatever you want because everybody trusts you. So you can go in with your sexual ideology, your abortion information, and now your trans information. And this is a planned attack. This isn't accidental. And I think it's
No,
important for people to realize this is not accidental.
no, not at all. There is a book. I have not read it because I can't get a hold of a copy of it. I would love to get a hold of a copy of it, but it's called After the Ball, and the subtitle is a little complicated. I think it's How America Will Come to Accept Homosexuality in the Next Decade. And it was written by two marketing professionals back in the late 80s, I think it was. And people who have read it have told me it reads like a history book today, but they laid out how to market sex, sexuality, homosexuality, to get people in the culture to embrace it. And that's exactly what has happened. It's been very strategic. The trans agenda, I have no data to back this up. This is what I think happened. After Obergefell in 2015, when same-sex marriage was legalized at the federal level, all of these activists who'd spent 30 years working on same-sex marriage suddenly had nothing to do with their hands. We got the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. We got what we've been working for. What do we do now? I think that's the point at which they turned their sights on trans, because that's right when all of the trans propaganda began to explode. And I think they took the lessons they learned over those 30 years and applied them to gender ideology, got it in the schools, got it in the social media was starting to open up, and they took great advantage of that. There are influencers all over every social media platform looking for kids. And so I agree with you. It was very strategic. It's been very laid out. Every time I hear a parent tell me, well, it's not happening at my school. My school's really sweet. Oh, I don't know what I want to do, but I just want to wake them up. I've been involved in this long enough now that parents who came to us at the beginning of when we started in 2018, 2019, and said, oh no, our school is great. Our school isn't doing this. Those kids are 5 years older now, and I've heard from multiple parents saying, oh, I wish we had listened to you. We had no idea. The school is lying to us behind our back. Now their kids are 18, 19, 20, and there's nothing they can do because the kids are adult now and they're having the surgeries, and it's just heartbreaking.
We had a gentleman, he's actually one of the representatives, I believe, in the state, and he and his wife noticed their daughter was losing weight, and she was 12, and they thought it was strange. And she was spending a lot of time in the bathroom, and they thought that was odd too. I mean, she was 12, she wasn't into puberty really yet, not quite. And then so one day while she was at school, they looked around in her room, like, what's going on? And under her mattress, they found a book from the school library teaching her how to be anorexic and bulimic. And the book taught her how to puke up everything she was eating. And they approached the school, and the school supported the book, not the parents. So they were spending the next year or two fighting to get this book out of the school system. But in the meantime, I mean, they had to take their child for therapy, and the kid was a mess. And it was the book, the school stood by the book. Kids have a right to know about how to throw up everything they eat.
Yeah, that's the argument. Kids have a need to know. They need to know about homosexuality. They need to know about trans. Social media, there are these chat rooms for anorexia, for bulimia. They're called pro-ana and pro-mia groups. And it's kids who band together and support each other in being anorexic or bulimic. There's no one monitoring those groups or moderating those groups. And it's the same thing with the gender ideology. Nobody's watching it. Social media is the Wild West. It has no oversight. The Federal Communications Commission has set laws about what you can advertise to children in newspapers, magazines, movies, TVs. Social media has none of that moderation or oversight. People can do whatever they want, and they are.
You use this term grooming, um, which we identified that concept with sexual predators. But there is a grooming going on with these kids
Mm-hmm.
of pulling them in.
Yeah. Yeah. Teachers are being taught this stuff at professional development and how to support trans kids. And teachers are identifying children. Oh, I think that child, may be trans, and going and talking to the child. And we know you plant ideas in kids' heads. I was at a screening of a movie, Dysphoric, by Don Johnson, and there were some trans activist protesters across the road. So some of us went over and spoke to them and invited them to come in. And we were talking with them and said, teachers introduce ideas to kids and they're not always right ideas. And this one protester said, teachers can't change children's minds about anything. And I thought,
Wow.
okay,
Why are you there? Why are
well,
they
my,
there?
my friend next to me said, teachers can tell kids that Santa Claus exists. And this protester just turned around and turned her back to us. Um, doesn't want to argue, doesn't want to argue. But that is what happens. Teachers have a lot of power to introduce things to children. Um, and when a teacher introduces something that's different from what the parents have taught, such as parents teach their kids, boys have a penis, girls have a vagina. So kids have that understanding. Then the teacher comes in and says, oh, that's not true. Girls can have penises and boys can have vaginas. Now that child is in the middle of those two ideas and has to decide, do I believe mom and dad or do I believe my teacher? And that is not something that any child should ever be put in the position, especially at young ages, of having to decide.
And the really scary thing is at that age, they will choose the teacher over their parents because they've been told by their parent, listen to your teacher.
Right. Well, and in many
If my
cases,
parents said 2 + 2 is 4, and my teacher said 2 + 2 is 5, but my parents have said, listen to your teacher is smart. I'm going to choose 2 + 2 is 5 because I'm a
yeah,
kid. And I've been, that's what parents say, listen to your teachers, right?
right. Right. And
So,
also, in many cases, the child is spending more time at school than at home. And this is heartbreaking.
right,
We have
right.
before school care programs and after school care programs. At my kids' elementary school, there were kids who were at school from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. That was the max they could be there. Well, then they get home and mom and dad have been working. They're tired. They get dinner, they do homework, and then they go to bed. Where are they spending the bulk of their time? At
Right.
school. That's a pretty
It
simple
really,
calculus.
and it's like good cop, bad cop. The parents are bad cop. They're the ones that, set the limits and the law and you get disciplined, whereas teachers can be good cop. I'm your buddy, I'm your friend. Um, but
Yeah.
they have a huge amount of power over even in college over what people believe.
Mhm.
I was in I think my second year of college. It was a big class, and I was sitting, it was about at least 100, 200, 250 students, and I was in the front row. And I was aware of the power that a teacher had. I was a little bit older because I'd taken a couple of years off. And a teacher in his lecture made a statement to the effect of, there's nothing wrong with abortion in the first trimester. And he just
Mhm.
sort of slipped it into his discussion. And it was interesting because I got to know him years later, and he was basically pro-life, but not in the early stages. And
Mhm.
so I raised my hand and I said, excuse me, a minute ago you made this statement about early abortions. That's not a fact, that's your opinion.
Mhm.
I was like shaking, and he said, yeah, yeah, whatever. And he went on with his lecture. So I raised my hand a second time, and he's like, yes, what? And I said, what you said about abortion, early abortions being okay, that was your opinion, not a fact. And he was like, yeah, whatever. And so he went on with this lecture, and a third time I raised my hand, and by now it was really persona non grata. And I was like,
Oh, yeah.
he's like, what do you want now? And I said, what you said about abortion was your opinion, not a fact. And he finally yelled at me and he said, fine. What I said was my opinion, not a fact. I said, thank you. He said, can I go on with my lecture now? I said, sure.
Good for
But
you. Good for you for sticking to your guns.
yeah, but it was like, really, that was horrible. And I thought, there goes my A in this course. But, he did give me an A, but, and we actually wound up being friends. And I wound up being friends with his wife, which was interesting. But I was aware of the power this man had over us as students. And I was not going to allow him to have that power on something that was that important. But that was hard to do. Like, I don't know, that must have been some kind of grace that came in because I was generally pretty much a chicken in college. And yeah, that was
Well,
just
you
grace.
kept the other kids in that class from just blindly accepting that as a fact.
Right. But we do. I mean, that power that especially in elementary school and junior high and high school, middle school, is a huge amount of power of what teachers say. And parents need to be aware of that. And also those are discussions if you have kids, and I would say, and you're not dealing with the trans thing, have these discussions at over the dinner table of the ideologies that are out there. um, talk about, the trans thing, talk about abortion, talk about relativism, talk about these things that are not good in our society, so that when they pop up in school, um, people can be aware of it, and the kid can go, oh yeah, there it
Yeah.
is.
I have a good friend who she grew up in communist Croatia, and she talked about her and her siblings maintaining their faith in Christ in a very anti-Christian culture. And I said, how did your parents prepare you for going to public school? What did they do? And she said, oh, they just told us before we went. They said, when you go to school, they're going to tell you that God doesn't exist. That's not true. God exists and he loves you and he made you. They're going to tell you that the Bible is fiction. That's not true. The Bible is the Word of God. And she said, so when we went to school and our teacher said, there is no God, we said, oh, yeah, mom and dad said they were going to say that. And
Right.
that follows a psychological concept as well, which is primacy. The first thing we learn is the thing that we tend to hold on to, that our belief persists in. That's why it's so important, as you said, for kids to hear this stuff from their parents first, be talking about this at home so they're prepared, because once you've taught them the truth, you're inoculating them against the lies that they're going to hear later.
A lot of times, I mean, I do a little study group with some of my grandsons who are in their teens now, and their first reaction when I talked about, relativism and, this idea of, there's no truth and all of, and the trans stuff, is to say, sort of, oh, grandma, this stuff isn't like really out there with educated people. And
Mm,
so I wish I had the quote here from Supreme Court Justice, is it Robert Kennedy, who said the definition of freedom is to be able to define who you are, define the meaning of the universe, define everything. And so I read that to them and they were just dumbfounded. Like they said, what kind of an idiot would ever say anything like that? And I said, well, this is from a Supreme Court justice.
yeah.
So we have this is what is in the depths of our culture right now, that you can do. Freedom is to define yourself, define the meaning of life, define the meaning of the universe. I mean, like,
Yeah.
wow, it's everywhere.
And
But
kids don't recognize that they're being indoctrinated. I teach at a Christian school, and I teach psychology. And just last week, I had the section of the book on sex and gender. And there's many things in the textbook that I disagree with, and I present it that way. Before I presented, I gave each of my students a little slip of paper with some questions on it. I said, just check the ones that apply to you. And I said, this is completely anonymous and this is completely anything you say is acceptable. I just want to know where you are. Half of my students, according to what they selected there, are cool with homosexuality and transgenderism. So even in this supposedly protected community where I know they have been taught truth, half of them are still infected by the world's ideology. And when I try to talk with them about it, they have no idea that they've been indoctrinated. Oh, this isn't in public school. No, this is just common sense. And it's frightening to see that that many of them have already been taken down kind of the wrong path.
Right. Right. I want to end with one thing that you mentioned. And there's so much in your book. I really highly recommend it to everyone, not just if you're dealing with a trans kid who's dealing with this, but your neighbor might be, but also preparing your kids, making them aware that they are going to encounter these ideas. But one of the not last things you mentioned is basically the idea of self-help, for parents, putting the oxygen mask on yourself first, like really taking care of yourself through this process, because it may be a long process. It's not going to be an easy process. And you really need to take care of yourself during this time. So maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, it's exhausting. Parents who've been through it routinely call it a nightmare, the worst thing they've been through. It can be very taxing on a marriage, on the other members of the family. In some ways, you're dealing with a special needs child. And we know families have special needs kids. Sometimes the other kids feel kind of abandoned and ignored because they don't have the same needs that's kind of sucking all of the life out of the parents and the family. And so making sure that you've got people you can turn to, somebody that when you wake up in the middle of the night angry or terrified, you can call or text and say, hey, I need prayer. I need someone to talk to. Working on your marriage, making sure you're together on this, that you've got each other's backs. When one of you is exhausted, maybe the other one takes over for a little bit. Um, it's a tough thing for people to go through. And so sometimes also parents have had to tell the transgender identified child, look, I know this is really important to you and it is important and we want to help you through this, but the rest of us have lives too, and we've got to keep living our lives, because that transgender identified kid has been told that he or she is the center of the universe. Everything revolves around trans. And just hearing that from a parent, like, yep, we love you, we care about you, this is important, but you know what, we've got other kids too. We're not making everything in our family about this. That can take some of the wind out of the sails as well. But yeah, just make sure you're caring well for yourself.
And keeping in mind, what is it? The family that prays together stays together. So staying in
Absolutely.
prayer, staying in grace.
Mm,
For those of us who are listening who are Catholic, it means making sure you get to Mass, to church, getting yourself to confession, making sure that you're getting just as much grace as you possibly can
mm.
in the situation. I know we are running out of time, but is there anything that you wanted to mention that we didn't get to? There's so much in your book that's really important.
I would just want to reiterate with parents, none of us are perfect parents. We've all made mistakes. Don't blame yourself for this. This is something that it's predatory. It has come after your child. It has come after your family. A lot of people think, oh, this kind of thing happens to those families, not to good families, but this can happen to anybody. So trust that God knew it was coming. Nothing surprises God. He knew this was happening. This is just another iteration of a very old heresy that people can create themselves and don't need God. And there is a way through it. If you've made mistakes, own up to them, apologize, ask for forgiveness, and then know that there is a way through this. People do get their kids back. You're not alone. You can get your child back too.
Where can we get the book?
The book is available at Sophia Institute Press, and it's also on Amazon.
Well, I thank you. And I want to mention, folks, the book is not super long. It's 200 very easy pages, clear, concise, lots of practical advice, so it's not just theory, it's practical stuff. It's a wonderful book. So really thank you. Thank you, Maria, for writing it.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
It's a good reference book, good resources, and an easy read, in the sense, not easy on the topic, but easy to understand, which is great. You have a wonderful writing style. So
Thank you.
it's a good, much needed in our crazy culture.
I look forward to the day when it is not needed. I look forward to the day when it's taken out of print.
Yeah, I hear you. Amen. Yeah. How about you end us with a prayer?
Sure, I'd love to. Lord, again, thank you so much for being here with us. I pray that every word lands where it needs to. Thank you so much for Kiki, for the voice that she gives to supporting people and bringing issues to light that need to be made aware of. And ask your blessing on her continued work. Every family, Lord, out there who's going through this, we pray that you'll just be with them, lead them into wisdom and godliness, and help them save their children, Lord. And we lift up all these requests in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here, and please stay in touch. Do you have anything else in the works that you're writing?
I am working on a general parenting book. I don't know if that will come out through Sophia or something else, but hopefully that will be out soon.
Keep me in mind, and it's been wonderful to have you here today.
Thank you. It was great to talk with you.